So one of the things that I think is incumbent upon all of us in this room is to keep our companies off this slide. You know, these are companies that had products that were relevant at one point in time. You know, at one point it mattered who was the market leader in phonographs. At one point it mattered who was the market leader in books, of selling printed books. Those spaces don't matter anymore. Innovations came along and rendered them kind of unimportant. And so if you look at this slide, our job is to make sure our companies don't end up on this slide. Now, even in our space, there's IBM on here, because if you notice, IBM used to dominate the hosting of software for companies. And now what came along was they weren't paying attention, and Amazon came into the marketplace and kicked their behind. And so now Amazon is the default location where people put software up on the cloud, or what used to be that private hosting space. So this is I think the key message is, it's our job to keep our companies off of this slide. So I'm going to talk about these topics here. You know, I work a lot with Jim's organization. Jim has invested in some of the innovations that I'm going to talk about. We'll talk about our model for how we invest together. But what Jim and I do is we work together to kind of drive innovation in the products. And a lot of my examples are going to be from the Team Center organization, where I spent a lot of my career. But we've also worked in other areas as well. So I'm going to talk about the need for innovation, some approaches, some examples of how we apply those styles of working together, and then I'll talk about how does the cloud change all of these things. So the first thing is, you know, change is hard, you know, and it's difficult to be, you know, open to innovation sometimes if you're leading. If you're the dominant player in a space, sometimes you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe I don't need to change. Well, that's not true. Everybody is going to have to change, or your name is going to end up on that slide that we started the day with here. So when you're leading, though, change is hard, and change can be difficult when you're winning. And so I think that's a key message there, is you have to continue to innovate. Now, John wasn't the first person that said this, but he was the first person that said it that I heard. And so John Heller was the Caterpillar CIO about 10 years ago, and he presented this line to us saying that culture eats strategy for lunch every day. And at the time, I thought, okay, well, that makes sense. I can understand that. But that was actually also before my career kind of took a shift where I started focusing on innovation. And now I can say, culture eats strategy for lunch every day. And in fact, not only is that kind of a well-known statement, you can actually get a book on Amazon.com about this whole topic. So not only is it something that I agree with, you can get a whole book that you can read about this topic, because it is the reality. People don't like change. People don't like to have to do something different. And I think it's something that all of us have to kind of fight against. Going back to innovation, and I'm going to come back to the cloud at the end, but I thought I'd start with the cloud as well. If you look at this space that Amazon created, they're the leader in this space. Now, by the way, one thing you guys might not know is on these Gartner Magic Quadrants things, these are at an exponential scale. So Amazon isn't just actually just kind of inching away. This is actually an exponential scale, so they're up the hockey stick here. Azure is a great offering too, but Amazon is leading in an exponential fashion here. And so what they've done is they created this space, and not only are they dominating it with profit, with revenue and market share and all those things, but they've got 5 times the computing power of the next 14 vendors in this space. So that's what you call dominance through innovation. So let's talk about some of that sort of thing. Now, groups that I've worked with have definitely had the attitude of fear to fail. You know, I'm not going to try something unless I know I can do it. Now, I would say if you're putting a man on the moon, or if you're putting a man on Mars, I fully agree. Failure is not an option. But if you're writing software and you're trying to be innovative, your team has to have the freedom to fail. Because if they can't fail, that means all they can do is what they already know how to do. And so I think it's really important. I was really excited. I got the slide on the right half of the screen here. I got this from our own IT people. So even on our IT organization, they're encouraging their staff to try things, and it's okay to fail. Which what you've got to do, you've got to be able to fail without the fear of punishment or the stigma of failure attached to you. You can't say, oh, Fred did something wrong once, I'm never going to use Fred again on anything. So I think these are all important things, because your team has to have the ability to fail, but they also have the ability to fail fast. Because here's the deal, right? If you put a team of 15 people on a project for 3 years and they fail, that's bad. You know, that's a big investment that you've made, and failure is going to stink on you, right? But if you put 3 people on a project for a month to try something out and it doesn't work out, hopefully you learn something and you move on. And so that's why it's so important to give your team the freedom to fail, but fail fast so that you can recover. Now, these are some interesting characteristics, I think, that I always talk about, because when the culture of your team is based on fear to fail, this is kind of the knock-on effects of that. You get conservatism in everything that they do. You get bloated estimates. The developer doubles the estimates of what he thinks, then the supervisor does, then the manager does, then the director does, and all of a sudden it's taking 9 man-months to do something that should take a day, right? And so what happens, these are the characteristics that happen when your culture is fear to fail. And so what I say to all the groups that I work with is, let's not do this. Let's acknowledge that they exist. Let's acknowledge that that might be the group that's around us, but let's not do this, because we can't innovate if you have these characteristics in your culture. So that's why we need to innovate. Let's talk about some approaches. You know, the Mythical Man Month, I read it when I was in college. It was written about mainframe programming with COBOL, but I will tell you, I believe that it's as true today as it was in 1975. And so, you know, a young whippersnapper that's going to be reading that is going to say, oh, it's mainframe and it's COBOL. It's true today. And so I think with core development management, I think that is the fundamentals that are true today. But there is a new style of innovation management that I wish would have been out when I did my .com days, because I think maybe it wouldn't have went bust. But you know, the lean startup, you know, there's a whole lean startup movement. Hopefully most of you have already heard about the lean startup. Here in Boston and Silicon Valley and Seattle, there are big lean startup movements. And it really talks about a new way to innovate. And it's a really exciting thing. It, you know, talks about, you know, the fact that you have to do validated learning, you have to go fast and that sort of thing. But when you read the book, I had a difficult time a little bit, because I've always, other than my .com days, I've always worked for large enterprises. And a lot of the examples in here are about small companies and how they do things. So you kind of have to kind of defocus your brain a little bit while you're reading it and you have to extract the value, because it's not necessarily natural. But I was very excited when last year the Lean Enterprise came out, because that was written for me. And hopefully all of us, but it was definitely written for a person like me. For a person that's in a big company and that wants to try to innovate, this is a fantastic Bible for how you can apply the rules of the Lean Startup, but on enterprise software in the kind of space that we serve. And so one of the things that you'll take out of that book, there's lots of lessons in both of those things, but I think that one of the key quotes I thought was, where there's fear, you get the wrong numbers. If you've got a development manager that pounds the table because my dashboard needs to be green, you're training me that I need to lie to you, because you don't want the truth. You want a green dashboard. So I think it's really important here that, you know, where there's fear, you're going to get the wrong numbers. And so one of the challenges here, you know, our next speaker is going to talk about agility. I think I'm going to talk a bit about agility throughout mine as well. You know, the important thing about waterfall, we've been doing waterfall since the 70s. But, you know, waterfall has its advantages, because, you know, at that peak when you're getting close to project freeze, the team's velocity is pretty high. But the problem is the high is not worth the hangover, because there's always that rebound effect of what happens after you've done that hard push. And so what we're trying to say is a nice, strong, steady pace of Agile is going to give you a higher velocity and overall higher throughput than these splurge and purge areas of waterfall. So we embrace Agile in a lot of the things that we're doing. You know, whether you're doing Kanban or Scrum, I don't really care, but you're going to have these kind of roles. But part of the secret sauce, irrespective of implementing Agile, is these characteristics. Is the team empowered? Do they have clear lines of communication? Do they have a total commitment to what they're trying to do? And so I think these are kind of that secret sauce. So as we've been implementing Agile on our teams, that's kind of the secret sauce that we apply, as opposed to the standard rules that everybody applies. Now, what we did is, I ran the Team Center Innovation Organization for about 3 years, and we took 1% of the funding of the R&D team. Now, with that 1% funding, you can get a lot of things done. So we did some things as self-funding. But then what we also treated ourselves as a lean innovation team, we kind of treated ourselves as an entrepreneurial team, where sometimes we'd have to go for funding. And so I would go to Jim and say, Jim, I've got a great idea. I think this is going to benefit us. I need some of your JT Toolkit guys to kind of come over and work with us in this area. And so we would do a joint investment sometimes, or even go to the product teams to get them invest. And so we did self-funding and partially venture funded. Now, but here's the important thing. If Jim decides to invest in my idea, I have not opted into another boss. He's an investor. I'm going to treat him like an investor. I'm going to give him reports. I'm going to tell him how I'm spending his money, but I'm not going to tell him how to manage my team. It's my job to manage my team. I'm not opting into a new boss. So whenever we got funding inside the team, we treated them like an investor, not, oh, I'm going to do what you say now. That was a very important thing. And so in both models, the way we measured success was would somebody want what we did afterwards? Because as you can imagine, it's a lot cheaper inside of Siemens PL for somebody to acquire my technology that I create than going and buying a company for 10, 20, $100 million, right? So that's how we measured success, was did somebody want what we did? Now, every software company, every company for that matter, you're going to have some amount of development process, right? I have a reputation inside a Siemens PL of hating process, and it's a well-deserved reputation. But I think there's got to be a certain amount of process to get by. And so one of the things that we focused on is the minimum viable bureaucracy that's necessary to get by. And so one thing that's interesting is if you're Siemens, and I don't care if you make factories, hardware, or software, you're going to follow what we call a Q-gate process. That's a given. It's one of the things that Siemens calls the non-negotiables. When you're acquired by Siemens, you are going to follow the Q-gate process. But there's flexibility in how you adapt it to your business. But these are all the gates that people use generically across the entirety of the Siemens Corporation. Now, what we do for the waterfall projects that are like at a 12-month plus release cycle, they have a number of gates that they follow, and you have to get in front of the executive board of Jim and his peers for every one of these things and kind of ask permission to go forward. Now, what happens is if you're doing an agile product like some of the products do, they have it like a 6-month cadence. There's much fewer gates. There's the may I get started and may I release. And you have to go explain why your product has the quality that it's supposed to have. Did you do the due diligence? Did you meet everything that you're supposed to do? And so there's these gates that we have for the agile products. But one of the things we implemented as well is the gates for the continuous integration, continuous deployments products. So for those companies that are going at a really fast pace, what they do, at the beginning of the year, they say, here's what I'm going to do. They present that to the exec staff. And then at the end of every quarter, we say, as we said we would do, here's the releases that we did. Because if you're going fast, there's not enough time to get in front of the executive board and say, may I release, may I release, may I release. There's not time. And so here's what we did. Now the important thing about this is all approved. We went through all the bells and whistles to get the bureaucrats on board, to get the process police on board. And so this is an approved way to behave inside of Siemens PL that all the product teams can follow, because we went through the rigmarole of getting that minimum viable bureaucracy approved. So, there's lots of ways to release software. I don't care whether you're Microsoft, Amazon, Siemens, or whoever. There's a certain number of controls that any software company has on releasing software. Basically, it's what's the quality of the release, the schedule of the release, and what's in it. What's the scope of the release? Now, some people will lie to you and say that they can control all three. And I will say that, well, if they'll lie to you about that, they'll lie to you about other things too, because nobody on the planet can control all three. So you fundamentally have to pick two. Now, what two you pick is up to you. I'm not going to say what's right or wrong. Some groups that we live with will pick the content. They'll say, I must have this content, and I'd like it by this date, but I guess I have to live with the date. What I try to do with all the groups that I work with is you say, look, the quality is defined, the schedule's defined, live with the content. Because what happens is we're going to go so fast that who cares if you miss a date? The next release is 2 weeks away. Who cares if you're not going to make this one? It's going to be available soon. Don't put it in the product until it's ready. And so that's a big focus for how we do a lot of the things that we do, is focus on the quality is set, the schedule is set, the content is flexible. That also gives the developers the freedom to say, God, my stuff's not ready, I'll wait. I'm not going to inflict poor quality software on my customers. So I'll show a couple examples of how we did this. Omnio.com is one of the cloud SaaS assets inside of Siemens PL. It's a big data platform that's focused on product quality, your customers' product quality. And so what we do is we have a 2-week sprint cycle. So every 2 weeks we're iterating. And in that 2-week cycle, you've got to do all the legal things you've got to do. You've got to get your patent clearance, you've got to get your open source approvals done and that sort of thing. And so you don't put your product you don't put your source code into the product until it's done, if you know that vernacular. And then every fourth iteration in 2016 is put out on the cloud and in production. What we're changing that team to in 2017 is every 2 weeks we're going into production. And so this is what happens. It's funny how even right now when it's an 8-week release, there's a lot of pressure. Oh, I got to get it in because if I don't get it in, it's 8 weeks until I put it in. Kind of funny that 8 weeks it matters, right? But really, when it's 2 weeks, then it really doesn't matter that you're missing a date because it's going to be right around the corner. Don't submit your code until it's ready to go. And so part of it, what you learn when you read the Lean Startup or the Lean Enterprise, it's about validated learning. One of the assumptions in the Lean Startup is you're not as smart as you think you are. You don't know what people will pay money for. You're going to have to ask them what they'll pay money for. So one of the things that we've done is we've really tried to set up this process of this early learning. And so, John, we took that an Active Workspace. We took that program that you started with the ECI activity, and we continued that forward, where we would put the software out in front of customers. We'd say, we'd build it in a sprint, try it on the cloud, and get feedback. Is this what you want? Is this fast enough? Is this the capabilities that you want? And then we'd get that validated learning. Now, the different products do work at a different cadence. The traditional model that we followed before is that it would be 3 years from an ideation until realization on the customer, because there's just kind of built-in latencies when you're doing that waterfall. With some of the agile projects that are in a 6-month cadence, now we've reduced that quite a bit, and now with things like Omnio.com, we're moving down to a 2-week release cycle come January. So this is kind of how we do that validated learning, because what happens is, somebody might enjoy being a table pounding development manager, and I'm going to yell at my team, and they might delude themselves that they're going to get their team to work faster by being a table pounder. But the reality is, it's not going to work. You're going to punish the innocent, the guilty are going to get away with it anyway, and all you're going to do is destroy morale. You're going to destroy that entrepreneurialism or the intrapreneurialism. And so as part of these innovation teams, there's got to be somebody that can shield that team, because one thing that companies are good at is bureaucracy. And let's slow down. Let's not go at that breakneck pace that you want to go up. We've got to slow down. So there's got to be somebody that can shield that team from the bureaucracy, from the legal teams, from the process teams. There's got to be a certain amount that you've got to do. But fundamentally, when you have that team that's focused on innovation, there's going to be lots of forces that are trying to slow that team down. So one of the things that we've done, I don't know how your company is about roadmaps, but we've been around for a long time, and I've been around almost 30 years now, and we love roadmaps. I mean, the company can't exist without a roadmap. And one of the first things that we see is when a team does their Agile training, the first thing they say is, well, we can't do roadmaps anymore because I'm Agile. So if I'm Agile, I can't do roadmaps. And the thing I say is, well, let me ask you a question. Do you think that Silicon Valley startup, when they get funding, do you think they get funding from investors without telling them what they're going to get for their money? They don't. So our investors are no different. They want to know what they're getting by giving you money. And so we agree that everybody needs a roadmap. We do it out, we kind of forecast it out in 10 quarters with some buffers added. But what we do is we do keep 2 sets of books. Now, I know typically 2 sets of books means, oh, you're not being transparent. Who are you lying to? My point is, the whole company has visibility and transparency to both sets of books. But if you don't have 2 sets of books, you're going to start to get this fear to fail culture, because now if I have a conservative external facing book and an aggressive internal facing book, and both of them, I'll give anybody in the company transparency to both, but if you don't have those 2 sets of books, all of a sudden the conservative one becomes the one that everybody starts to follow, and then you're absolutely going down the wrong path. So I think it is important to transparently embrace that metaphor. So let me show you some examples. For 3 years, I ran the innovation team for Team Center. And we did 9 innovation projects with our 12 guys during that 3-year period. 7 of them were acquired by the products teams. So in the way that we measure ourselves, there were 7 successes and 2 failures. Now, those 2 failures in red, I like those 2. I don't know why they weren't acquired. I thought they were cool ones that could have been acquired too. My opinion is unimportant. The teams that had to take it forward said, no, thank you. Okay, let's move on. You have to embrace that you're going to fail at some of these things. So I'm going to talk about the 3 in blue as examples of some of the things that we did. So if you look at where we were in Team Center in 2012, the feedback that we were getting from customers is it was hard to use, hard to install, performance was too slow, and had a high cost of ownership. And these were estimated at hundreds of man years to resolve and 5+ calendar years to resolve. So it was a big deal. So we said, let's do it. Let's go at it in a different way. So we did some things with Active Workspace, where we created a new experience with a 0 install client that everything had to be fast, and we also put Team Center up on the Amazon cloud. And so if you look at what we tried to do a completely different experience where everything is less than 2 seconds. Login in the traditional Team Center client could be 30 to 60 seconds. Expanding a big bomb could be 5 to 10 minutes. We've said no, everything has to be 2 seconds or less. Figure out a way to pull it off. And so you see these other things that we did with a zero install client. So these goals that we set ourselves were kind of crazy because according to the normal process that you had to know how to achieve it, these wouldn't get funded. But we went ahead and undertook it anyway. One thing that we did as well is that the way that a normal kind of Team Center client works is the client asks a question on the web tier, the business logic kind of asks its question, there's kind of an iteration with the database, and then the answer gets back. And so sometimes that can take as long as it takes because depending upon the question you ask, it takes longer to answer that question. Well, what we decided was we couldn't play by the same rule book because if we play by the same rule book, we're going to get the same answer. Our colleagues aren't dumb; they're just in straitjackets on how they can do their job. So what we did was we ripped off the straitjacket and said, no, these are our goals. Go achieve the goals no matter what you have to do. So we said, well, if I have to be as fast as a search engine, I'm going to apply the search engine metaphors to PLM. So now what we do is we go index the database ahead of time so that we know the answer before you ask it. And now what happens is that it's a much more tuned answer through the database, and nearly everything that you can do in Active Workspace today can be achieved in less than 2 seconds because of these kind of new metaphors where we kind of changed the playbook. Another really important patented innovation that we did was we said, you know, I go into Google image search and I search on Boston. It comes back almost instantly, and my pages fold up. And I can tell by my scroll bar that there's a bunch more. But you know, Google doesn't waste your time. It doesn't go get those images until you scroll down. And we thought, isn't that a great metaphor for PLM? Because what we would do in Team Center is if you ask for 1 million objects, we'll say, John, I'll be right back. I'm going to go get 1 million objects. And it takes as long as it takes, and you're going to wait until I get them to you. What we decided to do was more like this, where if you say, get me 1 million objects, I'll say, sure, I did. If your screen's full, how do you know I didn't do it? And when you move your screen around, if I'm fast enough to fill your screen up, I did, right? And so what we decided to do is, you know, a good-natured lie is a healthy lie. And so if you tell me to get 1 million objects, I'm going to make you think I did, and I'm going to do it in less than 2 seconds. And so we changed the whole thing on its head. Instead of just saying, you know, yes, sir, I'm going to go get you 1 million objects, I'll make you think I did. And so what we were able to do with things like that was instant top-level where you use structure-driven visualization, kind of breadcrumb trails on your product structure, those sorts of kind of innovations. And what that did now is here on my Surface laptop, which, you know, I have a Surface as well, but it's not a great GPU, I can actually go in and fully visualize a full-on vehicle now with a zero client install. With a zero client install, I can go in and really interrogate my information. Now, I don't know how process is at your company, but if I would have, in Active Workspace, if I would have said, oh, and it has to work on a 100-inch touchscreen, I would have been killed by process. They said, okay, well, Dave, you have to have the budget approval to have the 100-inch screen at every development site, at every test location, and everybody has to have them, and the idea would have died, and they'd have said, success, I got rid of that requirement. But what we did was we said, look, it has to work on any modern computing device. Use HTML5, no install, it should work on anything. So here I am on a 100-inch touchscreen using Active Workspace, doing everything that works naturally. Even down, I don't know if you know this, but a Tesla has a spectacular Android tablet on it. It's huge. And it's got a 3G connection to the data as well. So here I am on I apologize, I didn't wear that watch today. Here I am on a Tesla. I've got my 3G connection to Team Center on the cloud. And I'm able to interact with everything. And I can do everything that Active Workspace can do. I can visualize product, I can do sign-off. We don't support running an Active Workspace while you're driving down the road, but the point is we support any modern computing device without having to do any kind of client installs or anything like that. And what we achieve that by just saying it has to work everywhere. And the same thing is with the proliferation of mobile devices, you've got to have a responsive design. It's not enough to just squash your UI down to a phone. You have to have a responsive design that does the right thing for a big tablet or a small phone. And so those are the sort of things we did. We handle those by kind of broad requirements, not detailed requirements that would have been rejected by the process police. So when you look at these innovations, 7 that were acquired, 2 that were rejected, if you look at just those three were really pretty wildly successful. Active Workspace was delivered for 1/20th of the estimated cost. 2.5 years early. Server rendering, something that we did in partnership with Jim's organization. That JT viewing, for the first time, you can view JT on any device in the world, and up to 100 times faster because of server rendering. Because now what I can do is I can render that vehicle in seconds in the data center, send the images down to my device, and I'm viewing a huge product structure in seconds on my device, even if it's on a 4G, 3G connection. And then on the bill of materials capability, what we did was we did that for 1/10 of the estimate, 3 years early, and up to 60 times faster than what we did. And again, this is because of the fact that we tell you some healthy lies to make you look like you've got the full bill of materials. So if you say, go get me a 1,000,000-part BOM, you think I've done it, and it's super fast. So that's some examples of what we did by following those approaches. And then we talked about now the cloud comes in. So let's talk about the impact of the cloud. So, people can continue to do by-hand deployments and continue doing waterfall. Evolution is moving forward, though, so you kind of stay there at your own peril, but you can. But really what we're trying to think is you've got to be moving to more frequent code commits. You've got to move toward this continuous integration, this continuous deployment. That's the direction you're going to have to move, or you're going to become obsolete. And so Jim was talking about some of the things, and so a typical enterprise software that releases every 9 to 18 months, they might do that. Active Workspace is every 6 months. Omnio, which is our big data platform, today is every 8 weeks, and we're moving to every 2 weeks. And what's important here is, even today when we're releasing every 8 weeks, that product is done, and it just sits on the shelf for 2 weeks because it's ready to go that next day. The day, even though we Project Freeze is 2 weeks before we put it into production, for most of that 2 weeks it sits on the shelf. So think about that. So today, if a customer gives me a requirement, depending upon the size of that requirement, I can have that capability in production in 2 weeks. I've done the database upgrade, I've done the version updating, the customer just logs in and uses it. But look where the watermark is. Google releases 5,000 times a day, Amazon releases 23,000 times a day. If you do the math, that comes out to 64 million deployments a year. And so this is where things are going. So if you look at where we want to be going, we want to be moving up that chain, not kind of staying down that chain. So one of the things I think that's also important is when you pick a cloud vendor, whether it's Azure or Amazon, automating what you're doing I think is really key, because customers are going to want their data close to them. Some customers will say, my data must be in Germany. I can't use your product if I can't keep my data in Germany. So I'm going to sign an agreement with you that I'm going to use your software, I'm going to use your cloud SaaS offering, but the data can't leave Germany. So you have to be able to do those sort of things. So when you have these different data deployments, you've got to be able to automate all of them, or what's a lot of times called infrastructure as code, to where you automate how you do everything. Even though you might have a multi-tenant offering, the prospect, the customer might say, that's great, I want a single tenant. Well, for a price uplift, I'll certainly give you a single tenant. I'm still going to run it. I'm still going to manage it. I'm going to charge you more because you want a single tenant, but I'm going to still have all the control that I have so that I can keep the price points that I keep. So those are some important things. Now let's talk about SaaS offerings for a second. When I want to go run, when I request a ride from Uber, or if I want to go do a trial from Salesforce.com, if you'll notice, something that's missing is there is no button that says, oh, can you please pick me up in a GM car? That's not there. There is no button that says, oh, I want to use Salesforce.com, but I want it on Azure. When you ask for a service, you don't get to pick how it's given to you, right? And so it's kind of the same thing with cloud SaaS. So if you want to, when you purchase a SaaS offering, you get access to the software, you get a user account, some support level agreement. You don't typically get to pick the cloud where it's deployed. You might get to pick the region where it's deployed, but you don't get to say, I want Azure or Amazon, right? And so SaaS offerings, like you're going to hear John talk about Onshape next, Netflix, Autodesk, these guys don't just happen to run on Amazon, but they leverage the heck out of that innovation platform to go fast, to have lower operational cost. Now, because what's going on here is that there's a big change in cost. Because of open source and because of the cloud, the costs to start a company have gone dramatically down. And you can see that in these unicorns. So all these companies that reach $1 billion valuation, you can see how crowded that's starting to get. And a lot of that is that they're leveraging the power of the cloud and the power to go fast quickly. Now, when you pick a vendor, if you pick Amazon, there's a lot of capabilities in Amazon so that your team can focus on the application capabilities that your customer is going to pay for and not the commodity computer science that just has to be done. There's a lot of heavy lifting in software that has to be done, but do you want your team to do the heavy lifting, or do you want to get that heavy lifting from someone else? my contention is when you can do it, when you can do a vendor lock-in, I recommend it because you get a lot higher velocity. So Amazon has a bunch of capabilities. Azure's a great platform too. Azure, if you want to pick Amazon, you want to pick Azure, we don't really care too much. There's a lot of things there so that your team can focus on the application that your customer is going to buy, not the heavy lifting of the platform. Now, I do hear a lot of times kind of a natural bias that people have toward, I need to be cloud neutral, I need to be vendor neutral in my cloud. And I think, well, that's okay if you need to do it, but you have to realize there's a lot fewer features that you get to leverage. So if you have to, you have to, but let me just challenge you, do you have to? Because if you don't have these three conditions in red here, do you really have to be cloud neutral? Because it's a very expensive decision. Because if you decide to be cloud neutral, you are reducing the capabilities of your team by far. Instead of leveraging a cloud platform, they're going to leverage a cloud platform. So I think you have to make that decision very carefully. Because instead of all these capabilities that you're going to have available to your team, you're going to have only what's available through the cloud neutral lens. And so that's why I'm saying decide, but decide carefully. So I think our job is to keep our companies off of this slide. I think we can achieve that by some of the means we've been talking about. And I'll leave you with this thought. So I think these are your guidebooks to manage innovation in software. I think your team, they've got to have the freedom to fail, but fail fast. I think that velocity has to be designed into your approach of how you compile, build, deploy, and get the software into production. And I think you can't go faster if you're allowed to leverage the power of the cloud.